All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, I'm putting on my therapist hat to guide us through the modern crisis of burnout. We're going to explore how our work actually builds the core meaning of our lives and our overall social well-being. But more importantly, we'll look at how you can actively rebuild your mental resilience when the modern workplace just completely drains you.
So let's start with a really profound question. Why does the daily grind, and the sudden loss of it, mess with our deepest psychology? We so often treat our jobs just as a simple economic trait, time for money. But the psychological data shows us a reality that is way more complex than that.
We've all felt it, right? Standing at a crossroads, feeling totally disconnected by shifting global economic pressures, just searching for a renewed sense of purpose. Modern economic conditions are constantly reshaping our relationships and our fundamental human need to belong. And when a job is threatened or lost entirely, we aren't just out of a paycheck. We're faced with this massive psychological void.
To truly diagnose this modern feeling of burnout, we've got to look back at a huge historical shock. Let's talk about the famous Marienthal study. Back in 1929, the lifeblood of an Austrian industrial village, this massive textile mill, began to close down. By 1930, the looms went completely silent, leaving pretty much the entire town unemployed. The fieldwork analyzing this fallout started the very next year.
Now, you might logically assume that with all this new free time, people would engage in hobbies or start reading more. Well, actually, no. The villagers became deeply, profoundly apathetic. Researchers measured this unobtrusively. Library loans, for example, absolutely plummeted by 50%. The study proved that losing community cooperation and your sense of social contribution is actually far more devastating than losing the income. It completely fractured and disconnected the community. And that brings us to Marie Jahoda's research, which fundamentally reframes how we should look at work. It proves that a job isn't just a list of tasks, it's a profound psychological and social anchor. Taking part in shared work and cooperation is literally vital for our social stability and our own personal well-being.
So let's move into the reframe, defining a meaningful life.
If work is ultimately about social stability and contribution, how do we actively define meaning? Especially when the workplace itself is stressing us out? Well, we have to draw a hard line between seeking fleeting pleasure and building lasting happiness. Research surveying thousands of people shows that blindly chasing quick pleasure can actually negatively impact your objective well-being. But by contrast, consciously building deep engagement in what you do, that is what creates true, lasting happiness. To build that lasting happiness, researchers point to four main pillars of meaning: autonomy, competence, relatedness, and beneficence. Now, these aren't just corporate buzzwords. They demonstrate our hardwired, evolutionary necessity to cooperate and belong. If we want a healthy society and a balanced life, we really need to find ways to weave these four pillars into our everyday routines.
Which brings us to the micro level, finding flow in your daily routine.
Zooming in from the macro societal view to your individual daily actions, how do we actually transform the mundane? We use a brilliant psychological concept called flow, identified by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is this optimal state of complete engagement. It's a powerful, active way to shape your satisfaction and increase your enjoyment of even the most boring routine tasks.
I absolutely love this story from the research. There was this guy, Rico Medellin, who worked on an assembly line making movie projectors. It was a grueling, repetitive 43-second task that he repeated 600 times a day. Sounds like a nightmare, right? But Rico took this routine and turned it into a deeply satisfying game by consciously optimizing his tools and his speed, eventually bringing the task down to 28 seconds. He actually described his workday as better than watching TV. The crucial takeaway from Rico is that you don't wait for pleasure to miraculously find you. You have to choose an activity, accept it, set a micro goal, and then observe the feedback. You are the one actively creating your own engagement.
And that leads us into the practice, your self-therapy and emotional resilience toolkit. Think of this next section as your practical homework, concrete self-therapy tools you can use literally tomorrow to manage workplace emotions. Starting way back in 1926, industrial psychologist Marianne discovered that simply writing down our daily experiences reveals hidden anxieties hovering right on the edge of our consciousness. Making the unconscious conscious through written reflection is an incredibly powerful habit. So let's actually set up an emotion diary. This is a game changer for getting some distance from the vicious cycles of workplace stress. Here's how it works. When a strong emotion hits, write down the specific trigger. Next, record your bodily sensations, like is your heart racing, are your palms sweating? Finally, document the exact thoughts occurring in your head in that very moment.
Keeping this kind of diary actively snaps you right out of autopilot. By looking at your written thoughts, you can objectively step back and ask, are these anxious, repetitive beliefs actually true? This cognitive distance breaks cycles of anxiety and depression, and honestly, it empowers you to exercise free will over your own emotional life. Our second practical prescription is mindfulness. And I know it might sound a bit cliché at this point, but this ancient practice is now heavily backed by modern clinical evidence as an absolute essential coping mechanism for navigating daily workplace difficulties.
Try integrating this super simple breathing habit into your day. Just find the comfortable posture. Inhale deeply, counting to 6, and then exhale fully, counting to 6. Repeat that for 21 breaths. Clinical research shows this actively calms your vagus nerve and significantly reduces stress-related cardiovascular arousal in your body.
Beyond just breathing, you can build immense mental armor through other daily mindful habits. Try doing a quick body scan to release stored physical tension, or take a savoring walk outdoors where you really pay attention to your surroundings. You can also intentionally direct a forgiving, self-compassionate voice toward yourself when work gets tough. Practicing loving kindness doesn't just help you individually, it builds empathy and much better cooperation with your colleagues.
And I think this quote beautifully captures why we do all of this. All this self-therapy isn't just a selfish pursuit. As George Eliot wrote, "What do we live for except to make the world less difficult for each other?" Managing our own emotions ultimately helps us cooperate and build a much healthier, supportive community around us. Ultimately, by understanding your emotional triggers and consciously applying these practices, you are reclaiming your free will from the relentless demands of modern economic pressures. You're no longer just reacting on autopilot. You are consciously choosing how to respond.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take into your workday tomorrow. What small, routine task will you choose to transform into a meaningful project? Because by exercising your free will and creating your own flow, you really do hold the power to build a truly meaningful life. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.